from St. Louis Public Radio. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. Yesterday was another triumph for Missouri Republicans, who easily won every statewide contest up for grabs and maintained their solid majorities in the Missouri General Assembly. But yesterday produced one of the biggest policy failures for the Missouri GOP since they took over the legislature in 2002, the passage of Amendment 3, which enshrines abortion rights in the state's constitution. And abortion rights proponents are not wasting any time. They're headed to court today to undo one of the strictest abortion bans in the nation, as well as other restrictions on the procedure implemented over the past several decades. I spoke with Richard Muniz, the interim president and CEO of Planned Parenthood Great Rivers. Muniz says his organization intends to file a lawsuit to officially remove Missouri's abortion restrictions.
The lawsuit challenges not only the total ban, but a host of other bans on the books that are in conflict with Missouri's new amendment, the Right to Reproductive Freedom Initiative.
Can you talk about some of those other things besides the total abortion ban?
Sure. So long before Missouri's total abortion ban went into effect in 2022, Missouri had several other abortion bans on the books, including a ban on abortion at various gestational ages, 8 weeks, 14 weeks, 18, 20 weeks. And in addition to those, Missouri had several what we call TRAP laws, targeted restrictions of abortion providers. These are laws that, as the name suggests, target only abortion providers for unfair and discriminatory reasons, nothing to do with the actual health and safety of abortion patients or the care that we provide to them. But the purpose of TRAP laws are to restrict where abortion can be provided and ultimately to decrease access to abortion in the state, which we know happened because long before the Dobbs decision in 2022, there was only one abortion provider in the state, the Planned Parenthood Clinic here in St. Louis, and we were providing only 150 abortions a year before that Dobbs decision came out.
So you have probably been paying very close attention to what the opponents of Amendment 3 have said, that they're saying that this is going to cause all sorts of horrible worst-case scenarios, like abortion at 9 months of pregnancy, gender-affirming care for children. That's actually not the question. I'm not asking you to respond to those contentions. What I expect to happen is that for people like Andrew Bailey, who is still the Attorney General, to say Amendment 3 doesn't do anything and it actually isn't impactful and therefore restrictions could stay. Is that your expectation too? Because I think a similar thing happened in Ohio where they made all of these claims that measure was going to be terrible, but then when they were trying to defend it in court, they basically were trying to say it wasn't as expansive as they thought.
I would hope that the Attorney General, who is our state's chief law enforcement officer, would defend the Constitution and uphold all the rights in the Constitution to the full extent of, all of the provisions in the Constitution, whether he likes them or not. That would be my expectation and hope. But I, being realistic, I do anticipate that Jeff City politicians will fight against any expansion of abortion access in the state and totally contravene the will of the voters who have passed Amendment 3 and want to end Missouri's abortion ban.
That's Richard Muniz, the interim president and CEO of Planned Parenthood Great Rivers. Amendment 3, which enshrines abortion protections in the Missouri Constitution, takes effect on December 5th. Muniz says he hopes Planned Parenthood will reopen their doors in Missouri on that day. Again, that's December 5th. Joining us now to talk about this breaking development and the results of yesterday's elections is Anita Manion, a political science professor at the University of Missouri St. Louis. Anita, welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Hi, Jason. It's great to be here.
Before we talk about the election results more broadly, what did you make of the news that Planned Parenthood affiliates are immediately seeking to overturn the state's abortion restrictions?
I'm not surprised. This is something that they and their allies have been working on very hard in the face of efforts to thwart the ballot getting the initiative getting on the ballot, court decisions, and so they're raring to go to get this implemented in Missouri.
When I tweeted out yesterday that Amendment 3 passed, there were two skeptical reactions from Twitter or X or whatever it's called. The first was doubt that a Trump administration would let abortion remain legal nationwide. I'm living in the present now. I'm not going to predict what future President Trump is going to do on that. But the other was this assumption that Missouri Republicans would seek to overturn Amendment 3, yet that's going to be difficult. This is not a statute that the legislature can change or repeal. You need a statewide vote.
That's right, which is why our legislature tried to raise that threshold for constitutional amendments, particularly to stop Amendment 3 from passing, because once something is enshrined in the Constitution, it's much harder to overturn. We have seen our state legislature, though, in the face of ballot amendments that go against their wishes, do what they can to slow the process or stop those thinking about Medicaid expansion. Also, we've seen the state legislature, in the case of Clean Missouri, come back and put a ballot initiative of their own on. So I wouldn't rule that out, even though the incoming Speaker of the House says that they want to uphold the will of the people.
I think the other thing that people need to realize is if they put something on the ballot in 2026, that's going to be a midterm election when Trump is president. And typically, the president's party does poorly in midterm elections. The fact that it passed with, by 3 wasn't a huge margin when the state voted for Donald Trump by 18 percentage points. I wouldn't be so sure that they're going to be able to come back in 2026 or whenever. Could hypothetically be put on in 2025 if they really wanted to, and it's going to be successful. What do you kind of make of that back of the napkin analysis?
I agree. I think that, first of all, we saw efforts, to raise the threshold for constitutional amendments be unsuccessful because of infighting in the Republican Party in the state legislature. So I think it would be hard for them to come together to get this initiative on the ballot in 2 years. I think also that they would do that with the risk of, alienating their voters again. When you look at where Amendment 3 passed, where it exceeded 50% in Missouri, yes, it's those blue areas of St. Louis, city and county, Columbia, Kansas City and the suburbs, but also St. Charles County.
Didn't it pass by almost 10 percentage points in St. Charles?
Yeah, 58% in St. Charles. Well, 58% vote for Trump in St. Charles County, and I think 53% for Amendment 3.
Still, that's a pretty stunning result, given that
Absolutely.
St. Charles is much more Republican than St. Louis County.
That's right. And then other like Benton and Lewis counties also had over 50% support for Amendment 3. So, we see people who are Republicans are supporting this effort.
Yeah, and I want to kind of touch on that point because there, again, I think we found out last night that like Twitter and social media isn't real life, but there were a lot of people asking how could Missouri vote for all these Republicans and then vote to legalize abortion? And I think that Tori Schaefer of the ACLU of Missouri says perhaps the passage of Amendment 3 is not necessarily about that admittingly strange dichotomy, but is more of a message about how the public deals with very strict restrictions on abortion.
It shows the values of our state. It shows that people want reproductive freedom. And honestly, it says if you can do it in a state like Missouri, you can do it anywhere.
That was Tori Schaefer with the ACLU of Missouri talking about the passage of Amendment 3. Now, I do want to say abortion initiatives failed in Florida, South Dakota, and Nebraska yesterday. So they did not pass everywhere. But what do you make of her thought that maybe this shows that reproductive freedom is popular among Trump voters?
I think that is true. When we look at surveys, overwhelmingly Democrats and independents support it, but also a large chunk of Republicans. In a red state like this, you couldn't pass something without getting Republican support. And this isn't the first time we've seen liberal ballot initiatives pass at the same time we elect conservative legislators and presidents in Missouri. As far as the other states, we have seen conservative states like Kansas also enshrine abortion rights. With Florida, they actually voted 57% to have abortion rights enshrined, but their threshold is 60%, which is what could have happened in Missouri had some folks had their way.
I'd like to invite our listeners into this conversation. If you have a question or comment about the 2024 election results in Missouri, St. Louis, or Illinois, give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 382-TALK, or email us at talk@stlpr.org. Now, Amendment 3 was not the only thing on the ballot, obviously. There were a slew of statewide races. Republicans won all of them. And one of the big winners was U.S. Senator Josh Hawley. He easily defeated Democrat Lucas Kunce. And here is Missouri senior senator at his victory speech in Southwest Missouri yesterday.
They said that they were going to make an example of the state of Missouri. Well, tonight we made an example of them. Tonight we sent a message. We won this race. Tonight we voted to save the United States of America. That's what this election has been about from day one, and I don't know how the rest of the country is going to vote, but I have to tell you, it's looking pretty good, isn't it? It's looking pretty good. But I tell you what Missouri has said tonight is loud and clear. Missouri has said that we believe in this country, that God is not done with America yet. And we are here to fight for America's future. Are you with me? That's what tonight is about.
That is U.S. Senator Josh Hawley, who was reelected last night over Democrat Lucas Kunce. Okay, I understand that this race was probably more competitive than the other statewide races we're going to talk about, but there were some pretty obvious signs that Hawley was going to win. The Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee did not invest anything in Lucas Kunce, which is usually a sign they don't think it's competitive. Even though Hawley is reviled by a lot of Democrats in particular for objecting to Joe Biden's win in Pennsylvania in 2020, I hadn't seen a lot of evidence he was unpopular amongst Republicans. That's my analysis. What's your kind of takeaway from Hawley's win?
I think that's right. And Hawley has not only aligned himself with Trump and sort of the MAGA branch of Republican politics, he also has embraced in the last couple of years more of a populist message, doing things we don't normally see Republicans do, like going to a picket line. And so I think that he's tried to expand his appeal in that way. But because of the large distaste for him from Democrats in Missouri and beyond, Lucas Kunce had a very well-funded campaign. And, I think he was a stronger candidate than previous, like Trudy Busch Valentine. But ultimately, the Kunce-Hawley election had about the same margins as the Schmidt-Valentine election. So in a year where the Democrats were hopeful that, the distaste for Josh Hawley, the support for Amendment 3, maybe some excitement around Kamala Harris would help Democrats, it seems pretty much a status quo election in the Senate race.
Hawley wasn't the only Republican who prevailed last night. Lieutenant Governor Mike Kehoe dispatched Democrat Crystal Quaid, and Kehoe will be the next governor of the Show Me State. And joining us now to talk about what's next for Missouri state government is Sarah Kellogg, STLPR State House and Politics reporter. Sarah, welcome back to the program.
Good to be back, Jason.
What should Missourians expect from Mike Kehoe as their next governor?
I think that they should see a similar but not exactly the same trajectory that happened with current Governor Mike Parson, which isn't a huge surprise. Parson himself handpicked Kehoe to be his lieutenant governor back in 2018. And I think that there's kind of a lot to build off of what Parson has done the last 6 years of his governorship. And so I think it's not going to be exactly the same, but I think we're going to see similar desires as far as, being tough on crime, maybe changing education, lowering taxes. So I think it's going to be not too different from what we currently have.
Here is Kehoe from his victory speech last night in Jefferson City.
We're going to strengthen public education to expand school choice so that every single student has the opportunity to get a world-class education, and we'll prepare our kids for the workforce for making sure they have options they need to achieve their American dreams, whether that's a four-year college or career and technical education. And for future Missourians who do not have a voice, who we don't even know yet, I'll be on the front lines doing everything to ensure Missouri respects and protects innocent life.
That was Governor-elect Mike Kehoe talking at his victory speech in Jefferson City last night. So, Sarah, I want to throw a similar question to you that I talked about with Anita about. There is kind of this like gloomy expectation among abortion rights supporters that Kehoe and the Republican legislature are just going to, eviscerate Amendment 3. Again, I am not as pessimistic based on the fact it's a constitutional amendment and not a statute, but I'd be interested in your kind of observations, especially given what Kehoe said at the end of that clip.
I do think that kind of big changes to Amendment 3 won't happen merely because, as you said, it is in the Constitution. But also within that amendment, you have to remember, after the point of what is recognized as fetal viability, the legislature is allowed to enact changes. I think we will see some of those, basically taking what they are able to do and work without this session. Again, getting anything through the session is never a guarantee, especially a new bill. And then I do think that it is possible for the legislature to try to maybe do a different amendment. But again, you're going to talk about filibusters. You're going to talk about disagreements of what that should look like. I'm not sure what it's going to look like in the new year. I guess that's something that I get to cover.
Yeah. The other thing you're going to get to cover is the Missouri legislature, which I think is going to be basically the same composition between the House and the Senate. I can't imagine Democrats are very happy with this result because they had much bigger expectations that Amendment 3 would have coattails. What was kind of your thoughts about this state legislative results?
I think that's right on the money. Democrats only needed to flip 3 seats in the House to break the Republican supermajority and 2 in the Senate. And the Senate was always going to be a bigger reach. They had to maintain former Senator Rizzo's seat and as well as flip 2 basically for that to happen. And the election ended with both supermajorities being intact. It's not the momentum breaker that Democrats, I'm sure, were banking on and hoping for. So that's kind of, a message of Republicans saying, well, we were elected supermajorities. That's a line they like to say a lot. We were elected by a supermajority, which means that our constituents like what we're doing. And Democrats can't say, well, we broke that supermajority. So I think it is going to be definitely a different vibe than maybe they were hoping next year.
I do want to just list off some of the other statewide results. St. Louis Attorney David Wassinger will become the next lieutenant governor. Andrew Bailey and Vivek Malik will remain attorney general and treasurer, respectively. And State Senator Denny Hoskins will soon be Secretary of State. But we talked a lot about Amendment 3, but there were other ballot initiatives up for grabs. Missourians raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2026. They defeated efforts to build a casino at the Lake of the Ozarks and to allow fees to help sheriffs. And they narrowly appear to legalize sports betting. Kind of a grab bag of results here, Sarah, but what do you make of the narrow margin for sports betting? I wasn't super surprised, but I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
I wasn't either because I feel like the campaign against the sports betting was incredibly effective. I've had people, friends, family basically say, I saw an ad for sports betting that said all this money was going to education. And then immediately I saw a different ad saying that the money wasn't going to education. So which is it? So that's caused a lot of confusion, I think. And I think there was kind of an unsure element that maybe caused people to vote no out of caution. I also think that maybe if they had straight up been like, this is sports betting, maybe they would have gotten more enthusiasm, but making the main advertisement be education funding might have turned some people off as well. But ultimately, it was able to get through as far as we know.
Sarah, I completely agree. Actually, last night, my prediction was that this would be the closest ballot initiative in Missouri, and it seems like it will be. And for those same reasons, this is the one I had the most people contacting me about because they were hearing mixed messages. So part of it is, for a lot of the ballot initiatives, we don't have a strong opposition campaign, but for this one you did, which was funded by casinos. And so I think that that push and pull created this really narrow margin on this amendment too.
Sarah, before I let you go, I am not expecting continued Republican dominance of in Jefferson City to result in harmony among Republicans. I think still some of the same divisions between Republican leaders and conservative renegades are going to emerge over the next couple of years. I am much more pessimistic about GOP harmony than I am about Amendment 3 actually being impactful. What's kind of your thoughts on that?
I mean, as far as I know, the Freedom Caucus is still going in the Missouri legislature, which means there is going to be this division between, more conservative, hard-right Republicans and other Republicans. And I think that is going to cause division. We talk about maybe priorities for Mike Kehoe, and he has all of these policy goals. Well, it's really interesting to me that with Parson, the last couple states of the state, really, it's been talking about the budget. And the one bill that he asked for last year didn't happen. And so I think it's not a guarantee that whatever Kehoe wants, he might get, because I think there's going to be a lot of division, and he doesn't see eye to eye with some of the other Republicans.
Sarah Kellogg is St. Louis Public Radio's State House and Politics reporter. Sarah, thank you for joining us today when I know we got incredible amounts of sleep last night.
Still kicking. Thanks, Jason.
We need to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll talk about the results in St. Louis and St. Louis County with St. Louis Public Radio's Rachel Lippman. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. We now return to our conversation with University of Missouri St. Louis political science professor Anita Manion, breaking down the results of the 2024 election in Missouri, St. Louis, and Illinois. And I'd like to remind our listeners that you can be part of this conversation. If you have a question or comment about the election results, give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 382-TALK. Anita, one of the things I was watching pretty closely was how St. Louis County voters decided on the presidential race. And perhaps this was kind of foreshadowing what happened nationally, but Democrat Kamala Harris ended up doing slightly worse than Joe Biden here. Joe Biden got 61% of the vote, which was kind of a high watermark for Democrats. And the last time I checked, she actually got like 60.5 or 60.6, which was not an improvement. And that dovetailed with Harris's underperformance in key suburban areas. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think that's right. And, we're starting to look at exit polls and try to understand what was happening here with different voters. I think there's also evidence of Harris underperforming when we look at the House races. She's falling behind what Democratic candidates for the House are doing. It seems like, she didn't do as well as Biden with particularly men under 30, Latino voters, Black male voters. And so I think there's a lot that the Democratic Party has to unpack. Is it messaging? Is it Trump? Is it the candidates in the campaign that they're putting forth? It looks like this could be the first time that Trump wins the popular vote. So I think that they have a lot to think about.
There wasn't really any coattails effects in terms of state legislative races for Amendment 3 in St. Louis County. In West St. Louis County, all of the GOP House members who seem to be vulnerable won. David Gregory, a Republican, kept the 15th senatorial district seat from Democrat Joe Peerless. And I'm not going to sugarcoat this. This is a big disappointment for Missouri Democrats because there was a lot of expectation that they were going to actually gain tangible ground in West St. Louis County, and they didn't. So how do you kind of explain that underperformance from state Missouri candidates, not necessarily Harris here?
Yeah, I think that the Democrats in Missouri did have these high hopes that between Amendment 3, they thought there would be more energy around Kamala Harris, that they would turn out more voters that would be supportive of their initiatives and their candidates. And for the 4 previous elections, the Democrats have flipped more seats than they lost in the state legislature. So that momentum, instead of increasing, stalled here. They didn't, so far, haven't flipped any seats. So I think they have to ask themselves, have they hit a ceiling, or what do they need to do to improve the Democratic brand in Missouri? I think we keep asking this question when we see ballot initiatives that are liberal being, voted on at the same time as candidates who are conservative. Where is the disconnect there?
It's a funding issue.
Sure.
Somebody else on Twitter brought this up, but Amendment 3 had over $30 million behind it. The opposition didn't have nearly as much money, and their messaging wasn't as sharp. None of the candidates for statewide office had that type of money, and none of the state legislative races, except for Joe Peerless, had that type of money.
$1 million.
So I think we got to be brutally honest that money does matter in these sorts of things. But rather than rant about campaign finance stuff, The other major takeaway is while turnout in St. Louis County was great, it was around 76%, down from 2020, but 76% turnout is really good. It was bad in St. Louis City. I don't even think they broke 60%. And how do you kind of explain this divide?
Yeah, I think it was 59% in St. Louis City, again, down from 2020 there, where they were more like 66%. I think there's a number of factors, including when we look at turnout data, people who are older, who are better educated, those tend to be higher propensity voters. But I think we have to ask ourselves, too, what are our turnout efforts in the city, and why do people feel disengaged from, the election process? I think that's something that particularly Democrats need to work harder on. And perhaps part of the reason is they just take the city for granted, that it's a Democratic stronghold, so they're not out there maybe working and canvassing in the same ways they are in the county. I want to give both the city and the county, though, the boards of elections credit for the way they ran the election, especially implementing early voting. We have an early voting polling place on campus at UMSL, and boy, it was busy for all 2 weeks.
Let's take a call from Jerry, who lives in O'Fallon. Jerry, welcome to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Thank you. I was a little bit heartened to see Ray Hartman nominated for the 2nd District, which is where I live. But I was going to wonder, like, if he had died or something, because I saw absolutely nothing, no ads, no events, anything until probably 10 days before the election. And I know he has name recognition, but even so, I mean, he came, 45, 55, I think was the last result I saw. I think that she was a very vulnerable candidate. And I think if someone had just been out there getting the message across that, she's been she's going to enter her 7th term, really just as a backbencher.
Well, but yeah, I do want to just say she won 54-42. So it wasn't as close as it has been in the past. And I think that's not surprising because they added parts of St. Charles that are pretty Republican, and Franklin, and half of Warren County. But also, I don't think Ray Hartman didn't get national support like Jill Shoup got. So I think that's probably why you didn't see him much on TV. What's kind of your thoughts on that, Jerry?
Well, I think there are still ways today to get your name out there on, social media. There's a lot, I guess, better ways than not. I wouldn't say better, but ways that don't cost as much. But I mean, I saw absolutely nothing about his platform, about no information at all. And I try to pay attention and seek this kind of stuff out.
Well, Jerry, thank you for calling in today. And I'd like to bring in St. Louis Public Radio's Rachel Lippman to talk more about the St. Louis and St. Louis County results. Rachel, welcome to the show, first of all.
It's always good to be on, Jason.
Before we talk about the charter amendments and the county council races, what do you make of this turnout divide between the city and the county?
I think it has a little bit to do with the fact that municipal elections in the city of St. Louis are on a weird, odd cycle. So if you are not into the candidates on the races in November, why would you, there isn't that extra layer of turnout to want to come and have impact in St. Louis local municipal politics. And there had been some conversation about moving that onto the presidential cycle. And then they were like, well, could anyone actually make a campaign? So it's likely that it will stay on the odd cycle. But I do wonder if there isn't anything else driving people to the polls other than national candidates. And if you are not thrilled with your national candidates, what reason do you have to go out to vote? You also have to wonder if there were some issues, I know both in the city and the county, with flooding, raining issues, those kind of things. Did the weather have more of an impact for whatever reason in the city of St. Louis as opposed to St. Louis County?
Well, let's stick with St. Louis County first before we go to the city results. So it's going to be another 4-3 Democratic majority on the St. Louis County Council, which, if people have not been paying attention to county politics all these years, and I highly recommend that you you do pay attention to stay informed. I was about to say don't because it can be raucous, but no, I'm not. You should be informed about your government. It's actually not really as positive for St. Louis County Executive Sam Page as it may appear. Is that fair to say, Rachel?
That is correct. It does nothing to necessarily substantially change the dynamics in the politics on the St. Louis County Council. He had already lost one of his strongest allies in Kelly Dunaway when she chose not to seek re-election, and she was replaced by Gretchen Bangert, former state representative Gretchen Bangert, who has said that she would work with Sam Page on issues where they are aligned, but is not going to be as in lockstep with Page as Kelly Dunaway often was. And then Shalonda Webb very handily won her second term to the St. Louis County Council from the 4th District. And down in the 6th District, a Republican was elected there. That wasn't the surprise. But that was the seat that will be formally occupied by Ernie Trachis. And he often would split from his party to vote on policies that Page and some of his other Democrats supported. So that 4-3 majority will hold on issues that are important to the Democratic Party, but it may not hold on issues that are important to St. Louis County Executive Sam Page.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Rachel said there. I think that we're going to continue to see struggles on the St. Louis County Council, and Sam Page on some issues will continue to have an uphill battle. Even though Ernie Trachis could sometimes be a thorn in his side, he could also sometimes side with him. So it'll be interesting to see what the new dynamic is.
So here is a big marker of what is going to happen in terms of county executive county council relations. So Wesley Bell is going to become the 1st District's next congressperson. He is going to resign as prosecutor, and under the charter, Page gets to appoint his replacement. There is language there that says that the council has to approve the person, but I think that person could hypothetically be acting if they're rejected. One person that I have heard is interested in applying is Beth Orwick, who is Sam Page's chief of staff. And I could imagine that people who do not like Sam Page are not just going to rubber stamp that appointment, even though I would say from an objective standpoint, Beth Orwick is a very qualified candidate to be prosecutor. What's your thought about that, Rachel?
I would agree with that. And I'm going to be curious to see if Bell is having any conversations with the county council. He told reporters last night that he and Page have been in near constant communication, and he has mentioned that he wants someone from his leadership team to take over the post, but he acknowledges that it is Page's choice. Now, could Bell communicate with the council that he would be okay with Beth Orwick being the replacement? Is he putting pressure on Page to support someone who the council could also support? So is Bell working in back channels some way to possibly reduce the amount of rancor that could stem from this appointment?
So there were some charter amendments on the ballot. There's a really hotly contested one over when people started their terms, which it
hotly
wasn't
contested in a very, I think it got 80-something% of the vote. It was not close.
It was not hotly contested. That was sarcasm for anybody who wasn't paying attention. But, the one thing that I think was a little bit controversial in St. Louis County political land was the council having their own attorney. And that also ended up passing. What do you think that will mean from a functional standpoint after it goes into effect?
I will be curious to see what happens. And again, a position for the legislative body to have its own attorney is not unique. This is something that the Board of Aldermen has. They have their own attorney who has functionally the same duties that these hired attorneys would for the St. Louis County Council. I'll be curious to see, first of all, how often they actually do use this valve to get input from an outside counsel, if you will. And then what happens if the outside counsel tells them something very similar to what the county counselor's office has been telling them? You can disagree with a policy politically, or you can think that something is politically a good idea, but if you legally cannot execute the idea and are told it is legally not a good idea or constitutionally functional, that is an entirely different argument, and that is what lawyers should be looking at. So I'll be curious to see what happens if the outside counsel gives the county council, it's all confusing, the outside attorney gives the county council the same advice that they would get from somebody who works in Dana Red Wing's office.
Don't you just love it when different words sound the same, Rachel.
It's so much fun on radio.
And after a long, long night.
Very long night.
Let's move to St. Louis City. Voters there approved some charter amendments, but did not approve a measure giving the Board of Aldermen more power over the budget. Tell us a little bit about what will and won't change.
So the main thing that will not change with the failure of Proposition B is that aldermen do not currently have the authority when they make a decrease in one area of the budget to then go spend that area in money in an area of their choice. That requires oversight and approval from the Board of Estimate and Apportionment. That is Board President Megan Green, Board of Aldermen President Megan Green, Comptroller Darlene Green, and Mayor Tashara Jones. Proposition B would have taken out the step where the corresponding increase to a budget cut would not have had Board of Estimate and Apportionment requirement. And what was interesting or approval requirement. And what was interesting to me is not that this didn't just meet the threshold, which was 60% for a charter change. This was an outright failure. This would not have even have passed if it required just a simple majority.
Anita, I was actually a little bit surprised by that result because it is, when you think about it, a little odd that the legislative body of St. Louis City has functionally so little power over the budget. What do you kind of make of that result?
Practically, it probably would make sense to have that sort of power. But I think, in the wake of many controversies and scandals where, we've actually seen politicians go to jail because of some of these dealings, that probably voters thought, why would we give them this sort of, as they might see it, unchecked power over the budget? We want to keep that constraint in place, is what I'm guessing.
Rachel, before I let you go, a presidential election has just ended, and that means we are just on the precipice of another mayoral election, which we're probably going to be talking about a lot on this show.
Yeah, and there'll be a comptroller race, too, to talk about.
So what can St. Louis residents expect over the next few months?
I think you're going to continue to see Kara Spencer, the alderwoman of the 8th Ward, continue to use her current role as the chair of the Budget and Public Employees Committee to campaign, to push on some of these budgetary issues, some of the things we have seen with the Northside business grants. And will anybody else aside from Michael Butler jump in for mayor? And will anybody else aside from some candidates that have jump in to challenge Darlene Green as comptroller?
Well, we're looking forward to discussing more of that with you, Rachel. Thank you so much for joining our show.
Always a good time.
We need to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll talk about the land of Lincoln's electoral results. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. We continue our conversation about last night's election results with UMSL's Anita Manion, a professor of political science. Anita, we've talked a lot about Missouri. That's our collective home, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about my ancestral home of Illinois. And frankly, one of the stunning outcomes of this presidential race is that Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris only won the state by around 8 percentage points. Right now it says 53.4% to 45.2%. That is way down from Joe Biden in 2020. Were you as surprised as I was?
Yeah, I think Biden got nearly 58%, so that definitely was a decline. I think, as the night went on, we kept seeing these indicators that Harris was underperforming, and Illinois is certainly one of those.
And in fact, I think that a big sign that things were not going to go Harris's way was, in addition to Illinois, when I saw a tweet saying that she only won a county in Virginia, Northern Virginia, by 16 points, and Biden had won it by over 20. People thought it was a data error. for a second, but it wasn't. And that was a sign of doom, frankly. And I think this Illinois result is also kind of a indicator that her campaign, frankly, just failed. There's no other way to put it.
Yeah, and it was such a unique campaign, having begun only in the summer. Granted, they did raise remarkable amounts of money in that time, but I think they have to do an autopsy. Was it an issue? Was it a Trump issue? Is it the economy and immigration? Is it backlash on Biden? Is it backlash on a woman of color? What were the issues? But certainly they didn't drive voter turnout like they hoped and didn't get the enthusiasm that they wanted.
I think now that Trump is coming back into the presidency, there's going to be a lot of speculation about Democrats who are going to run in 2028. It's going to be an open race. Trump is barred from running for another term thanks to the 22nd Amendment. One strong possibility on the Democratic side is Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. He has been governor, I think, for a little over 6 years. He's worth several $1 billion. And he, frankly, has a really sizable record of accomplishment in Illinois in terms of policy. I just have a little bit of skepticism that he'll be able to stand out as much as some other candidates. But how do you think he stacks up against other potential presidential contenders?
Yeah, to me, it seems like Pritzker's been trying to position himself for this for some time, maybe thinking that Biden wouldn't run and there would have been an open primary this year. He certainly supported Biden, then Harris this year, but he has tried to create a national name for himself. And so I definitely think he'll be throwing his hat in the ring. Certainly, there will be lots of other contenders, too. We can think back to the 2020 primary, folks like Pete Buttigieg, who's also established national profile. Other folks, I think we're going to have a competitive primary on the Democratic and Republican side. And are we already talking about the next presidential election, Jason?
Well, if one of the candidates is going to be the Illinois governor and another could be U.S. Senator Josh Hawley,
that's
potentially, kind of have to start thinking about that because I need to start thinking about possibly traveling across Iowa, which is also another ancestral homeland of mine. My grandpa was born in Monroe. But enough about Jason Rosenbaum's family ties. I want to bring in St. Louis Public Radio's Will Bauer, who covers the Metro East for St. Louis Public Radio. Will, I'm going to pose the same question to you. Is this J.B. Pritzker's time to enter the national presidential arena?
That's a great question. Like Anita said, he's definitely positioned himself to be competitive in the Democratic primary. Now, whether or not he can stand out, because there's also Gretchen Whitmer's of the world, there's Josh Shapiro's of the world, there's Gavin Newsom's of the world. Yeah, I think it's probably going to be pretty competitive in 4 years from now.
From your perusal of Metro East counties, was Harris's slide really apparent there?
Yes, and I think the one that really, really shows probably as damning of evidence of the underperformance of the Harris-Walz campaign was in St. Clair County, which is where I am currently talking to you from. It's a Democratic stronghold, has been for a long time. Democrats have dominated here. And right now, Harris, and I'm not quite sure if we've got full reporting yet, but anyway, she's only up 49.2% to 48.9%. So just barely squeaking out a win in St. Clair County, which is a Democratic stronghold. Now, maybe that signals that St. Clair County is going to follow the trend that Madison County, just north of here, is going to go from a blue county to a red county. But when you're performing like that on a presidential election in a county like this, I think that shows you've got big problems.
You mentioned Madison County, which is home to one of my favorite cities in the Metro East, Granite City. Did they vote to succeed from the rest of Illinois last night?
So Madison County is still a part of the state of Illinois, but they did take up a advisory referendum, so a symbolic vote. And yes,
I should have pointed it out. It was a symbolic resolution.
Otherwise,
that would probably be topping the show. But continue, Will.
Yes. So Let me just pull up the results here. They passed it by a margin of 56.5% to 43.5%. And this is kind of part of a growing downstate Illinois movement that's kind of largely a number of voters on this side of the state would feel disenfranchised with the direction of Illinois state government. And this is a direct backlash at that. So Madison County becomes the first suburban county to pass this. All the other counties, 32 others so far, have been largely rural, low population counties, but Madison County is a suburban county. It's got 265,000 people. So yeah, it's I think for the secession movement, they think this is a big deal, getting, showing that it's not just an urban versus rural divide. It's a broader downstate versus Chicago divide.
Anita, what do you make of Madison County wanting to create, I guess, its own state with other downstate Illinois counties?
Yeah, we've seen similar movements in California. I think it is common for folks who feel excluded. So if you're living in a red area in a blue state, maybe you feel excluded. It might be how St. Louisans might feel in Missouri, that they, want to form their own state. But I think that Madison County has now taken this initiative, does show a larger shift from those rural red counties that, maybe some other people are disgruntled with what's happening in Springfield and Chicago.
Yeah, I feel a little hurt by this as a Chicago suburb native, but I also am not blind to the fact that people in downstate Illinois do not like Chicago. I admit it. I don't like the Cubs either. I'm a White Sox fan. Well, I would say that the congressional races in the Metro East were not probably as competitive as they have been in years past. We had that barn burner of a primary between Mike Bost and Darren Bailey. But Nikki Budzinski won re-election. What do you kind of make of the congressional results, and what do you think it means for the future of Metro East politics?
Well, the results definitely show what the Democrats had strategically done in 2021 with redistricting, and those outcomes kind of reflect that. So this 13th district could be a competitive swing district on paper, but the Republican running in that district wasn't up to snuff in terms of fundraising, and that really matters in today's world. And so, yeah, Nikki Budzinski cruised to victory, improved her margins just slightly, but against a poorly funded candidate, so I don't know how much that matters. And then, yeah, when you carve out a district to be competitive, the surrounding districts in the 12th district and the 15th district, where Mary Miller and Mike Bost will now be representing those districts for another 2 years. Those are Republican strongholds, and they're almost drawn so that a Democrat could never, ever have a chance. So, I guess we got the results we were expecting.
I want to bring it back to the Harris-Trump conversation a little bit more. When Trump takes office again, I could see a scenario where Pritzker and other Illinois Democrats would want to point to Illinois as like a real difference or a counter to what Donald Trump wants to bring for the rest of the country. Obviously, that may not matter in substance, especially if some policies get implemented federally. But could you see that happening? That there could be more of an emphasis on how Illinois is so much different from more red states when Trump comes back to office in January?
Yeah, I suppose that could definitely be an argument. And I guess to give Pritzker credit, because he's had Democratic supermajorities in both the Illinois House and Illinois Senate, he's been able to pretty much get done whatever he has campaigned on. Now, it looks like he's going to have a budget shortfall in the next fiscal year that he's going to have to deal with. But in terms of where the state fiscal situation was before he came into office and where it is now, it's dramatically improved. So, yeah, I think he's probably going to yes, that will probably be a common talking point for Illinois Democrats. But whether or not that can propel him to the presidency or even the Democratic nomination, I suppose we still got a lot of time.
Anita, in the last 45 seconds or so, what do you kind of make of the possibility that Illinois gets shown as a counterbalance to Trump?
I think that's true. I think governors like Pritzker, also Gavin Newsom in California, try to highlight those differences. But I think there's a counter to that, too, that Republicans like to point at Chicago like this bastion of crime and Illinois as this, budget failure. So I think that narrative is going to go both ways as we gear up for the next election.
Yeah, it always breaks my heart when people are like, oh, you're from Illinois? How many governors went to jail today? And I'm like, 2 in my lifetime. But I'm going to push my hurt feelings aside. I'm going to live in the present and not dwell on the past.
That's big of you, Jason.
Will Bauer is St. Louis Public Radio's Metro East reporter. Will, thank you for joining us on the show.
Thanks, Jason.
And Anita Manion is a political science professor at the University of Missouri St. Louis. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
The Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air is produced by Jason Rosenbaum, Alex Hoyer, Emily Woodbury, Danny Wysentowski, Maya Norfleet, and Elaine Cha. Audio engineering and sound design by Aaron Dorr. The politics editor is Fred Ehrlich.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.